All right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. So check it out. This one's gonna be a short one. I'm gonna start putting out short stories like this in between some of the longer stories. I know some of you guys like the longer stories, but I want to try to get some of these short stories out to you guys as well. Give me some feedback in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. Anyways, I want to try to get both of these stories out to you guys by tonight. So without further ado, let me get straight to it. Anyways, before I get into this, here's a quick disclaimer. All these stories that I've been putting out are stories that are based on factual events. They're stories that really happened. However, out of respect for some of those that wish not to be identified or mentioned in these stories, some of the names, including the monikers, have been changed or dropped altogether. So this story starts out on February 10th, 2002 at the Alameda swap meet, located on South Alameda Street in downtown Los Angeles. And this commercial district is in an area that was formerly known as Alameda Square. Similar to flea markets, this particular swap meet sold a variety of different items, including clothing, furniture, electronics, toys, pet supplies, collectibles, food, artifacts, as well as a variety of other items. Dating all the way back to its inception in 1983, February 10, 2002 started out like every other day did out there, with good music, cold beer, and with a diversity of people showing up, hoping to get a good deal or find cheap bargains like they do at every other swap meet, farmer's market, or flea market. So the Alameda swap meet is in the heart of 38th Street gang territory. This is considered to be their stomping grounds. There's other gangs that frequent that area besides 38th Street, but 38th Street basically controls the swap meet. This is where they slung some of their weapons, and this is also where they've engaged in other crimes, hitting small licks, robbing some of the merchants or pedestrians that came out to the swap meet, and banging on other gangs they would see in the area. You know, believe it or not, when it comes to 38th Street, they've been in existence a lot longer than most gangs in that area, despite the fact that they're a gang that doesn't get a lot of attention. Evolved back in the 1920s, and unlike a lot of the other gangs that eventually fall off, it's withstood the test of time. And over the years, it's been involved in a number of different rivalries that's escalated over a number of different issues. Some of it personal, some of it territorial, and some of it stemmed from issues that escalated on the streets. And because it's a gang that's been around for a long time, it's a generational gang, meaning it has different generations. You got your peewees, the younger guys, and then you got those that are referred to as the OGs, the older guys. Like all other gangs, 38th Street is a territorial gang. If you come into their territory, including the swap meet, then 9 times out of 10, there's gonna be an issue. However, aside from the swap meet, 38th Street considers its territory to be from 33rd Street to the north, 48th Place to the south, Central Avenue to the west, and Alameda Avenue to the east. That's considered their territory. But 38th Street also has its allies, other gangs that it has aligned itself with. Gangs such as 18th Street and Lenox. They've gotten along with these two hoods and have considered them to be allies for years. On the flip side, it's always been mortal enemies with Florencia 13, Barrio Mojados, and the Playboys. Whenever they see each other, wherever they're at, it's on site with these guys. In fact, Barrio Mojados was probably the one gang that had territory closer to 38th Street than most of the other gangs. They considered their territory to be Vernon Avenue to the north, 54th Street to the south, Central Avenue to the west, and Compton Avenue to the east. You know, one of the other things about the 38th Street gang is that it's another one of those gangs in Southern California that has fully aligned itself with the Mexican Mafia and is fully on track with the Mexican Mafia's taxation program. They're in alignment with them, and they have proven themselves to be loyal followers of the Mexican Mafia. Meaning that they not only pay their share of taxes, but they're also willing to put work in for the Mexican Mafia. As far as I know, they don't have a member from 38th Street that has evolved and has become a made member of the Mexican Mafia. Something that most of these neighborhoods take great pride in, because the way they look at it is, it's always an honor to have someone who will represent your neighborhood at the table. Someone who's also going to look out for your best interest, the same way that Tablas and his brother Babo did, by making sure that Florencia was always represented as being one of their most solid hoods, and making sure that they weren't double taxed or that the whole neighborhood didn't get green lighted. That's one of the perks or one of the benefits that comes with having a made member of the Mexican Mafia from your neighborhood sitting at that table. I mean, because think about it. If there's not somebody that's representing a certain neighborhood, they're more prone to getting taken advantage of, or they're more prone to bad things happening. Whereas if they had somebody that was looking out for their best interest, these things wouldn't occur. But regardless of all that, 38th Street is still recognized by the Mexican Mafia as being a solid neighborhood, and they take their directives directly from them. So anyways, as more people started showing up for this swap meet and the crowd got thicker, more gang members started showing up and they started making their presence known as well. For the most part, the tension between rival gangs didn't go beyond the usual mad dogging and posturing. However, as the day went on, the tension continued to escalate. So sometime around 11 a.m. that morning, a 911 call went out regarding a victim who had been shot several times on Staunton Street. The victim was lying on the sidewalk on the west side of the street and was said to have suffered several gunshot wounds. So the fire department were the first responders to arrive on the scene, and due to the severity of the victim's wounds, he was pronounced deceased upon arrival. The paramedics and local police would arrive a few minutes later, but when the personnel from the fire department found the victim, his face was covered with a white t-shirt and he was wearing a gold chain with the number 38 on it. This was indicative that he was obviously a 38th Street gang member, but at that point, he wasn't identified and nobody knew nothing about him. The only other physical detail that they took notice of was that the victim was holding what appeared to be a blunt in his right hand. Other than that, this just looked like another typical gang-related homicide that had become all too familiar in Southern California. So when the cops did their initial investigation, they seen a number of bullet impact marks on the sidewalk. And they also found several shell casings that they thought were from some type of high-velocity rifle. Some of the shell casings were in the street, 3 of them were by the victim, and then they found several across the street, which obviously meant that the shooter was running and shooting at the same time. At that point, before any witnesses stepped forward and before anyone made any statements, these are all the details that they had to go on. And this was all that was known by law enforcement. This case even stumped some of the gang experts from the Los Angeles Police Department because they weren't aware of any rivalries that had escalated in the area. This was something that just seemed to happen out of nowhere. I mean, they were fully aware of the fact that this type of gang warfare could happen at any given time, and that there doesn't always need to be an underlying reason for it. But this just seemed random and out of place. Usually when a conflict will escalate between 2 rival gangs, they'll look at some of the outward signs like graffiti, other instances where something else happened that led to that conflict, or something else along those lines. But nothing was jumping out at them. And at first, this just seemed like a rival had come into 38th Street's territory and had caught one of them slipping. But the streets talk, people talk, and it didn't take long for them to put this case together. So there ended up being several eyewitnesses who witnessed the shooting as it happened. And then later on, they would also get inside information from several gang members that were also involved themselves. At any rate, this is what ended up happening. And all these details, they would end up coming out later, either in police reports or during the course of the investigation. So on February 10th, 2002, Arnaldo Macias, also known as Lazy from 38th Street, decided to go to the Alameda swap meet with 2 other 38th Street gang members. Roberto Molina, also known as Silent, and Marcus Ledesma, who also went by Youngster. For these 3, the swap meet was a regular hangout they normally went to. It was close to their neighborhood and there was always something to get into. So at around 10 a.m. that morning, Youngster and Silent picked Lazy up in Youngster's 1996 Chevy Impala. And from there, they drove to the swap meet. Usually they would go strapped, carrying guns or some other type of weapons, such as a blade. But Youngster was on probation, and whenever they decided they were gonna go inside the swap meet, they knew they'd be rolling the dice and taking a big chance of getting caught. Because probation officers and parole officers were always walking around in the swap meet trying to catch people slipping. And like I just pointed out in the story I did before this one, if you're on probation or parole, you always run the risk of a random search. A parole officer or probation officer or any law enforcement can search you at any given time. You forfeited your search and seizure rights when you went on probation. When they put you on probation, you forfeited those rights. So they don't need standing. They don't need probable cause to search you. If they get a wild hair up their ass and they just want to search you, they can. And Youngster was in that same situation. He knew that if he went to the swap meet packing, that there was always the possibility of being searched by a probation officer, a parole officer, or a cop that might have ran his name and found out that he was on probation or parole. So on this day, Youngster, Silent, and Lazy, they decided to play it safe. So when they got to the swap meet, they parked in the parking lot and then they walked towards Staunton Avenue. This was one of the main thoroughfares that they would usually hang out on. So when they got to the corner of 45th Avenue and Staunton Avenue, Silent sat down on some stairs to roll a blunt. And while Silent was rolling the blunt, Youngster and Lazy decided to get some beer. So they continued to walk down Staunton towards a liquor store that they would always go to called Johnson's Liquor and Market on East Vernon Avenue in Long Beach. So after Silent finished rolling his blunt, he stood up, and this is when he noticed that a newer model grayish brown Thunderbird was slowly rolling by, and this made him feel a little uneasy. Anybody that's ever gangbanged knows what I mean when I say that a car was doing a slow roll by. When you've been raised in the hood or on the streets, these are the kind of things that you learn to watch out for, to the point of where it becomes second nature, because it could actually mean the difference of you living to see another day or you losing your life because you missed it. A car that's doing a slow roll or driving down the street with no headlights at night, to the average person, that might not mean nothing. They might think that someone forgot to either turn their headlights on or that something's wrong with this car that's driving real slow. But to someone that's been trained to watch out for these types of things, this is what sends up red flags. Seeing something like this might make you clutch, or it might make you hit the deck at just the right time. But unfortunately for Silent, no matter how much he was in touch with his surroundings, he got caught in a situation where there wasn't much he could do either way. This car had already gotten too close, so whatever was gonna happen was gonna happen. So as this Impala got closer, Silent, he clearly seen the slow roll. He caught it right away. He tried to focus in on the faces of the driver and the passenger to see if he could recognize who it was, but the windows were tinted, so he couldn't see. When the car was about 30 feet away from where he was on the sidewalk, it was too late. He knew he was in a bad situation and that these guys had gotten the drop on him. So he didn't recognize the driver, but he definitely recognized the passenger. And as soon as he seen that face, he knew that it was a face that meant trouble. It was Tank from Barrio Mojados, Gerardo Martinez, someone who he had had several run-ins with in the past. And Tank was somebody that Silent actually had history with. They used to go to school together when they were kids, and they used to hang out and drink beer together when they were youngsters. But later, as they got older, they stopped hanging out and they became enemies, as they joined different sets that ended up being rivals. Silent got clicked up with 38th Street, and Tank got jumped into Barrio Mojados. In fact, since their school days, Tank and Silent had gotten into a fight a couple years earlier, sometime around 2000. So this is what ended up happening. Silent and other 38th Street gang members were coming home from a car show when several of Silent's homeboys recognized Tank and they jumped him. And they didn't just jump him, they took the boot to this fool. They mollywopped him, and Tank, he took it personal. Tank took it so personal that from that point on, whenever he seen Silent or anybody else from 38th Street, it was on. Wherever they were at, it didn't matter. They were gonna fight. They'd end up seeing each other. They start throwing up gang signs, bottles would start flying, and then after that, everything would just end up going sideways. So for Tank, it was obvious that he felt like he never really got his get backs because he was the one that was always pushing the issue, and he didn't want to let it go. So this right here was a culmination of everything that had happened up until this point. Close enough to where Silent definitely recognized that it was Tank. They locked eyes for a split second, and then Tank jumped out holding an AK-47. Silent knew that he was cooked as soon as he seen the gun. There was nothing he could do, and it happened that fast. Yeah, Silent could have hit the burners and he could have took off running in the other direction, but what good would that have done him? He would have just got shot in the back. When someone's locked and loaded with an AK-47 and they got a full extendo ready to go, it's game over. So I'd be willing to bet that his entire life flashed before him and he had a chance to visualize all the people in his life that he cared about. You know, for those of you who have righteously knocked on death's door, you guys know that it's true what they say about your life flashing before you. I've been in that situation myself a couple of times, and I had those visuals. I know it might sound crazy, but it's almost like your soul knows that it's coming and that you're about to leave this earth. You know, in that situation right there, all that Silent really could do is hope that Tank either wouldn't pull the trigger or hope that he would get some kind of divine intervention. That's all he could hope for. But there would be no divine intervention for Silent. Tank was finally going to get his get backs, and he caught Silent slipping, and now he was going to make him pay for it. You know, if there was ever a day when he should have rolled the dice and threw probation officers and parole officers to the wind, this definitely was the day. He should have strapped up and he should have taken that chance, but he didn't. Without hesitation, Tank took up a shooting stance from about 50 feet away and fired multiple shots in Silent's direction. In rapid succession, he let off about 12 rounds and then he let off about another 15 rounds. So while all this was taking place, there was an individual by the name of Emerson Echeveste across the street throwing a football with his friend named Carlos Ledesma. And Echeveste and Ledesma would later tell police everything that they seen. So according to Echeveste, he seen Tank pull up and jump out of the passenger side of a grayish brown Thunderbird holding what appeared to be an AK-47. Echeveste said that Tank then fired anywhere from 12 to 15 rounds at Silent, striking him several times. He said that when he first heard the gunfire, he ducked down behind a gate and looked up in the direction towards 45th Avenue. Echeveste then went on to say that the bullets flew at Silent with such intense velocity that he could actually see the bullets hitting Silent's body and make loud wet smacking sounds similar to how a watermelon sounds when it gets hit with shotgun shells. So he said that after he seen Silent fall, he watched Tank walk him down, and then in cold blood, he fired a couple more rounds directly into him, making sure that he was on his way to Brazil. And then he said Tank turned, holding the gun close to his leg, pointing it down towards the sidewalk, and that he jumped back into the Thunderbird before it took off towards East Vernon Avenue. So within minutes of the shooting, someone called 911 and reported that someone had been shot on 45th Avenue and the corner of East Vernon Avenue. You know, I'm not sure how long after the shooting it was, but based on eyewitness accounts and witness statements, Tank was eventually arrested and charged with Silent's homicide. And the case was ugly. Several eyewitnesses that watched the shooting as it happened picked Tank in both a photo lineup and a physical lineup. Tank also had several visible tattoos that some of the witnesses identified. One of the more distinctive tattoos that he had was the name Raylene that he had on the right side of his face, just beneath his jawline. He also had Barrio Mojado on the front of his neck and Wet Town and BMS on the right side of his neck. So later, the gun was recovered by one of Tank's close associates, and after they did a ballistics analysis on the shell casings that they found at the scene, they determined that they were all fired from the same gun. So Tank had an uphill battle fighting this case in court. Lazy even ended up testifying against Tank in his trial. According to what I was able to gather, Lazy had some kind of epiphany where he felt guilty about being a part of Silent's demise. And as a result, he felt compelled to cooperate and testify against Tank. In the end, Tank blew trial and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, LWOP, plus an additional 25 to life. So there you have it, another senseless act of gangbanging and another split-second decision based on a fake sense of pride that ended up destroying two families. Silent lost his life at the young age of 21 and Tank lost his life to prison at the young age of 23. Right now, Tank's in Kern Valley State Prison, and regardless of whether he's active or not, I guarantee you that if he had a chance to go back and do everything over again, things would definitely be different. But unfortunately for him, he doesn't have the luxury of turning back the hands of time and replaying the events that happened on that day. For him, there is no do-overs. But for some of you youngsters out there that still have a chance, remember this story and others like it the next time you're out there in the streets and you end up in a situation like this. There's consequences for every action, so just remember that. If you want to be a gangster and you're willing to lay in the bed that you made for yourself, then the choice is yours and only yours. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you guys liked this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. As always, I just want to thank those of you who continue to show your unwavering support and for just continuing to tap into the channel. With that said, you guys enjoy your week and keep pushing that positivity. Until the next one, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.